Hi there, I'm Christine, and I serve as the Redemption Kids pastor. We believe and act on the conviction that Jesus' radical inclusive hope is for absolutely anyone. This means that whoever you are, whatever doubts, questions, or curiosities you may have, you have found a safe space here. Our church depends on the generosity of our community to continue this work. You could contribute at redemptionhou.com/give. The following sermon is from the second Sunday in Easter. Eastertide is the 50-day season of Easter that stretches from Easter Sunday to Pentecost and is a season of living in the hope and joy of God's renewal of all things in Jesus. Now I invite you to take a moment of stillness, whatever that looks like for you, as we prepare for the reading from John's Gospel.
Now when it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and when the doors were shut where the disciples were together due to fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be to you." And when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his side. The disciples then rejoiced when they saw the Lord. So Jesus said to them again, "Peace be to you. Just as the Father has sent me, I also send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, their sins have been forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they have been retained." But Thomas, one of the 12, who was called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples were saying to him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see in his hands the imprint of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." 8 days later, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas was with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst and said, "Peace be to you." Then he said to Thomas, "Place your finger here and see my hands, and take your hand and put it into my side. And do not continue in disbelief, but be a believer." Thomas answered and said to him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Because you have seen me, have you now believed? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed." So then, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book. But these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name.
So snarky comment that has nothing to do with anything except that I often wonder when I traverse from over there to over here with my coffee right next to my laptop, how nervous that makes some of y'all. Because I know some of y'all well enough to know that there's at least one person in here that's like, "Oh my gosh, it's gonna happen." And you're probably right. It probably one day will happen, and I will lose the sermon in front of me, and we'll just go off the cuff, and then we're all in for a real treat on that day. But believe it or not, it's Easter. And you're like, "Wait, no, your calendar's wrong." No, I know. We do the Easter thing on Easter Sunday, but the church calendar observes Easter from 50 days from Easter Sunday until the day of Pentecost. And this is one of the things that we have done is, as a church, we've kind of adopted the church calendar, at least in big, giant strokes. We don't do every single day that the church calendar observes, but we look at kind of these bigger things. And what that means is that as we go through the year, we actually are hearing and entering into and somehow living as a congregation the story of Jesus Christ and what God has done in the world. And so Easter finds us in this focus on discussion of resurrection. That Jesus Christ is actually really risen from the dead, and that what that means is that the church is actually for something. that we exist for a reason. We exist because, not just because God's like, cool, I guess we'll make this thing called church, that there is something going on that is connected to the fact that Jesus came back from the dead. And so I want to start with this provocative statement. You think that Easter matters because Easter has somehow changed your future. And what I want to suggest to you is that while that's partially true, that's not really why Easter matters. That Easter is not just about what happens when you die. That what Jesus has done is not just something for you that you can store away like a good safety deposit box for when you need it on your deathbed. That Jesus coming back from the dead is actually doing something for you right here and right now. Intrigued? I don't know if you are or you're not, but I'm doing my best over here, okay? But this season, this year, one of the things I've wanted to do for us is explore what it means for us to be church. And I know for a lot of us in this room, like just hearing that word, you're like kind of like cringing a little bit. Some of you are like, wait, why? But for many of us, there's some baggage around this word, church. The idea that you might be associated with that word is problematic. And so what I want us to try and do is enter into the possibility, opening ourselves up to the reality that maybe God could restore for us what this thing is called church, and that we might actually not only be a part of it, but might find it as like a good and beautiful thing, instead of one of the great forces of evil at work in the world, right? And so this series is called Arisen People, where we explore what it means for us as the resurrected people of Jesus Christ to live as the church. So what does it mean for us to be the church? I was in the car with my daughter this week, and she said something about going to the church, and she saw a building, and she said, oh, that looks like a church. And we had the whole like, well, you know, the church is a people, right? Not a building. We had that whole conversation, and she's 4, so it went right over her head. All she knows is there's donuts there. I was having a conversation with someone this morning, and she literally thinks every day when I go to work that I show up and eat donuts without her. So she's already starting in her church journey with baggage, okay? But here's where I want to start. I want to start with the negation. Church is not God. Thank God. And what I mean by that, and that sounds really obvious, but so often we can mistakenly believe that either the institution or the people that hurt us are somehow God, and that God has hurt us, and that is not the case. More often, though, what we do is we find that as a part of the institution, we believe that it's our job as the church to go and save the world. And so as one former mentor of mine put it, we charge hell with a water pistol. Sorry, I'm editing comments in my mind. That mentor turned out to have a problematic relationship with the federal government, but that's a whole other conversation. Filtering. Okay, where were we in the notes here? Right, so this sort of thinking that the church is meant to be God in the world has led to all sorts of problematic expressions of our faith. And it's led us to a place where we need to have a conversation about what actually is the church and what is the church for in the first place. The church's vocation is not to be God. Right? So sorry if you're a narcissist. But also for most of us, that's like a huge relief. Like God is not asking you to go and do his job for him. The church's job is not to save the world. As Stanley Hauerwas, the Christian ethicist, says, the church's job is not to make it more peaceable or just. The church's job is not to save the world. This is the work of Jesus Christ. And so mistakenly taking on the task of God's work, this is what leads us into things like the Crusades, where we're so convinced that we're going to bring in God's future into our present by doing the thing that we know for certain God wants us to do, and so we go and conquer in the name of God. This was the work of colonialism, where we come in and we bring all of the enlightened knowledge of Christendom into this culture, and we eradicate the culture of the people. This is the task of Christian nationalism, where we will make the world more godly by instituting legislation, we will legalize morality in such a way that it looks like God. It looks like the church. This is what happens when the church tries to be God in the world. We try to strong-arm what is actually our definition of what we think God's definition is of a world filled with peace and righteousness and justice, and we try to bring it into the world, oftentimes using coercion and violence. That should be telltale sign number one. But this is what we do. And all of this, you know it's there, you know it's happening when you see this. It all comes about through our work, our power, our effort, and has little or nothing to do with God. That's when you know that the church is playing God. No, the church does not exist to save the world. And I can say that confidently because I believe that Christ has already done that work. And that the work that Jesus Christ has done doesn't need us to add to it to somehow make it count or make it effective. And so Jesus' first words when he shows back up to his beloved disciples after his resurrection are peace. Peace. If you've got your Bibles and you want to follow along, we're in John. I don't even have the chapter in front of me. It's John 20, I believe. Am I right? My Bible trivia? Look at y'all. Great, thank you. John 20, verse 19, if you want to follow along. We're going to hit a couple of these verses. But this is picking up where we left off in our reading last week. So Jesus is just resurrected. He's just told Mary, hey, go and tell the others. And then we get verse 19. When it was evening on that same day, Resurrection Sunday, the first day of the week, and the doors were locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, peace be with you. Now, there's a couple things going on here that matter. One, John is making mention again, a second time, that it is the first day of the week. Now, he's not just saying this because it's really important that you know what day of the week it is for historical purposes. It's alliteration. He is bringing a callback. For those of y'all that are into Marvel movies, it's like an Easter egg. And it's a callback to the book of Genesis on the first day of the week when God created. And what John is doing is he is pointing to the reality that something new is happening. There is a new creation. This is a new day, the first day of the week. And that whatever used to happen is now completely different. And so Jesus says, peace be with you. And he says this again and again. And peace is Hebrew language for salvation. It's the word shalom. If you've been on the earth for long enough, you've probably heard that. And we tend to think of peace as lack of conflict, or maybe good vibes. Maybe a good hot yoga session and we have some peace, like the endorphins are firing or whatever. But peace in the Hebrew world is it contains a whole bunch. It is bounty, it is blessing, it is flourishing, it is wholeness, it is healing, it is communion. It is about as robust a word as you can have for salvation. It is Edenic. It is all things made new. It is peace. And so Jesus steps in and he says, peace, wholeness to you, everything you needness to you, everything you long in you has been given to you, peace to you. We have been made whole. We have been reconciled to God. We have been reconciled to our enemies. We have been reconciled to our neighbors, to the ground beneath our very feet, and even to ourselves. Peace. Not because you finally got it right, not because you had a great quiet time this morning, not because you know what chapter this thing in John is in, not because, fill in the blank, you came to church today. Peace to you, not because of your efforts, your work, your thing, your strength, your knowledge. Peace to you because of Christ. I love the song that we sang right after the Revelation reading and right before this reading. I thought it was stinking powerful, but maybe that's just me. This is about God's work. And so then what is the church for? The church's job is to bear witness to the God who makes all things new. The church's job is to stand and to point, both with our words, but also with our lives. The church's job is to bear witness to the one who saves the world. The vocation of the church is to be a witness to Jesus Christ. That is, the church exists as the visible work of God in the world. We are meant to show the world what God is up to exist as an alternative to a world without peace. In other words, the church's vocation is to be the church, the people of God, the gathered community in the presence and in communion with God. Christian ethicist Stanley Hauerwas, who's one of my favorites, I quote him all the time, has done a great deal of work on this, and he points out that all of this may sound self-serving or irrelevant. Another pastor trying to build up his church. Until we remember that what makes the church is its faithful manifestation of God's peaceable kingdom in the world. He concludes, the church is the social ethic. It does not have a social ethic. Right, so to put some meat on this, to flesh this out a little bit, I want to point to how we experienced this last Sunday on our Easter celebration. Because last Sunday, I'm convinced if you have eyes to see God's kingdom at work, you could clearly see God's kingdom at work among us here on a Sunday morning. A glimpse of peace. But like God's kingdom, it was not flashy, it was not glamorous. The smoke machine broke, so we didn't get to do that. It was not obvious. It did not show up in the ways that we expect or demand God's kingdom to show up. And yet, in a world that is divided, in a world that is growingly schismatic, in a world that is defined by who we're against and whose side we're on, we gathered in worship to celebrate Easter, and as we did in this room, we had married people and single people, people expecting a baby, people with a baby. We had gay people and straight people, trans people and cisgendered people. We had atheists, people who didn't know they were going to pay for groceries, how they were going to pay for groceries tomorrow, and people whose net worth is in the millions. We had boomers and millennials and Gen Z, and we gathered around the font as we baptized Emmy in Generation Alpha. And can I tell you the craziest part of all this? Every single category I just named didn't just show up. That they did something to make worship last week happen. From serving food, from participating in baptism, to power washing the front steps, from, right, you name it. Putting out donuts and making coffee and just showing up and saying, how can I help? This was not just like, hey, I showed up and I was like here in the room. At one point last week, we did some renovating in here. If you're walking in, you're like, why does this room look weird? I can't quite put my finger on it. We rolled up the carpet because it wasn't glued down, apparently. I say we, okay? I'm putting a lot of weight on that word when I use it. Me, did not do any of this. Other people did. And in one moment, we had a conversation in the hallway about whatever Trump is up to and legal stuff, while a crew was in here who were definitely on the side of the political spectrum who voted for Trump, while another crew who was unrelated to what we were doing was in the hallway who didn't speak English. And I'm like, oh my God, this is God's kingdom. This is what church is. This is how we stand in opposition to the world around us and outside of us, who is longing to destroy, to hate, to tear down, to win us over to their side so that we can destroy the other side. And in a world of hatred and division and suspicion and othering and partisanship and racism and class and social stratification and tribalism and all of the exhausting rest, we stood for a moment as an alternative. We stood for a moment with brisket in hand as a resurrection community, as the kingdom of God that actually is really breaking in. And I think we often miss this sort of thing because we, like Thomas, don't always have the eyes to see it. I think sometimes we don't really know what we're looking for or expecting or wanting God to do. We think that Easter, the resurrection of Jesus, has something to do with our future when we die, but don't believe it has anything to do with today, with our present reality. And so in this way, the popular theology of American Christianity or American church is this fancy word Gnostic. You can go ask ChatGTP about it later. ChatGT, yeah, I said that right, okay. So Gnosticism is basically this idea that like, hey, material stuff is bad, spiritual stuff is good, right? Don't work out, pray and read your Bible. Don't enjoy food, pray and read, right? This is kind of the dichotomy. What really mattered, what God really cares about is your soul. God is not interested in your body. And yet, when Jesus comes back in his resurrected state, he tells Thomas, touch me. Put your hands on my body. When God comes into the world at Christmas, he does not come into the world as a ghoul. It's just a fun word to say. Let me bring that one back. He's not a spirit. He's not a disembodied ghost. He's a human being. He is flesh and blood and material. God has redeemed stuff by entering into the death of stuff and then reversing the death of stuff by resurrecting. And so when God is resurrected in Jesus Christ, humanity is resurrected too, not just in some disembodied spiritual thing, but in our actual physical bodies. So that as you stand and grieve the death of a loved one, as you stand next to their body before you put it down into the earth, the hope of the Christian is that God will one day actually and really raise it back up. This is what we confess when we say that Jesus Christ will one day raise the dead. And yet, in American Christianity, we've kind of lost sight of this. And like good Gnostics, Jesus' resurrection is about something that happens to our spiritual self when we die and has little to do with our lives that are embedded in the here and now. And it's why so many of us struggle to have an imagination of like, what does God have to do with accounting? Or what does God have to do with the fact that I just might run into the back of this person I'm so angry at in traffic? Or just what might God have to do with my singleness? What does God have to do with fill in the blank? My real, everyday lived life. Thus, the vocation of the church becomes all about the promise of heaven and the liberation of souls to a disembodied forever future in heaven. But this is not what the New Testament says. This is not what the church has said. This is not what Jesus talks about. And it's no shock that we think that what Jesus has done has nothing to do with our lived material lives here and now. At the center of Gnosticism is this idea of special knowledge, right? Enlightenment. And if you have the special knowledge, then you're in. And if you don't have the special knowledge, then you're out. And so we, like Thomas, we come to Jesus and we want knowledge. And I know the room that I'm talking to. You guys love knowledge, and you'll have a lot of it. And knowledge is not a bad thing. But when we start to mistake God's work for our knowledge, I think we've just, in another way, made this about us and not about Him. More than ever, we mistakenly think that if we can know more, then we'll live better lives. We'll be better Christians. We'll love God more if we can know more. I need more data, more information, more trivia. Or, right, so if I didn't get you with that one, here's another one. That was my right. Here comes my left. And the ones you don't see always hurt the most, in the words of the boxing game I used to play on the Xbox. So maybe it's not like knowledge for you in the sense of like information. Maybe for you, it's the emotional knowledge, the emotional experience, the feltness of God. And so we'll dim the lights and we'll turn on the smoke machine and we'll play the chords that we know, like really, like those are the chords. And we'll get you to like feel some things and you're like, man, that's the knowledge that I'm looking for. And we can equate that with the work of Jesus Christ. There's a knowledge that if we have it, we can accept it and we can reject it. This is knowledge that we can then wield, we can use, and we can use it against God and we can use it against others. Look what I have that you don't. Look how much I know. This is all about control And for many of us, it's all about assurance. How can I know that you really actually love me, God? But all of this is rooted in ourselves. Something that we have, something that we do, something that we experience. And Stanley Hauerwas once again tells us that our salvation is not knowledge about which we get to make up our minds. Our salvation is flesh, crucified and resurrected flesh. Our salvation is wounded flesh. And so resurrection means peace. Even here, even now, peace to you, that God's future has already begun to be inaugurated, that God's kingdom is really breaking into the present right here, right now, even when you're like, the heck it is. Let me tell you about my week, right? What this means is that what Easter does is Easter brings our future, the things that we're hoping for one day in heaven, it brings them all here into the present. On the first day of the week, the new creation has started. It's here. It's now. And so, what is it that we have received in Jesus Christ? What is this great future thing that we have now? Jesus raises us up, awakens us to the inaugurated reality of God's reign, and invites us into the lived life of that reality. And so in our passage today, right, we see three ways that God's future is brought into our present. The first is this. In God's resurrected future, your life now has a restored vocation. Your life has a purpose, has a meaning, beyond the meaning that you had before, right? So maybe your life had no meaning before. Maybe your life's meaning was like, I just need to make more, earn more, vacation more, 401k more, whatever that is. But your life now matters, and how you live your life now matters. Look at verse 20. So after he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced, and they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, peace be with you. Just as the Father has sent me, so I send you. You are sent into this world to embody the peace of God, the love of God, the message of God. Fleming Rutledge has a quote that I love that she says, far from escaping the world, the Christian disciple finds his or her vocation precisely here, at the collision of the old world and the new world, where the struggle of the enemy against God continues, making a space for the conquering love of God in the world. That is, the Christian finds themselves at the place of friction between the world as it should be and the world as it is. This is where we find ourselves fighting for things like justice and human rights. This is where we find ourselves caring for our neighbors, not because we're going to somehow win them to Christ, but just because they're worth caring about and they're going through hell right now. This is what it means for us to love. And in God's inbreaking kingdom, your calling and your mission, as complicated as we might want to make this, and as as we might try and God, what do you want from me? Let's just strip it down and make it really simple. Will you love? Will you love? Will you love your neighbor? Or will you love God the way that Christ has? There's a Trappist monk, right? Because y'all love to read Trappist monks, I know. His name is Thomas Merton. You've actually probably heard of Thomas Merton. If not, he's great. But he says that your vocation, no matter what it might be and which nuances it takes and which valleys and paths and roads you go down, your vocation will involve somehow in some way manifesting God's love in the world right where you are. So this means you don't have to wait for it. It's not somewhere out there. And some of you are like, oh, dang, I wish it was out there, because that out there is a lot easier to love than the right here. It's usually always the case. But it also means that Christ has already sent you. It doesn't mean he'll never send you anywhere else. It doesn't mean you can ever change anything that you're ever doing. Some of y'all just change jobs and you're like, oh my gosh, no, you're fine, okay? But the right here, wherever your right here is right now, this is the world, this is the space, this is the realm that God is saying, now manifest my love there. I've sent you there. We are sent as Christ is sent, to love the world, and in doing so, we bear witness to the one who saves it. The second way our future has been brought into the present is that God is with us. We don't have to wait to be with God. God is with you here and now. Look at verse 22. When Jesus had said this, he breathed on them. This is a moment that I'm like, that's weird, okay? Like, I imagine, I apologize, this is sacrilegious, but every time I read this, I'm like, hot breath Jesus, like, I don't know. But yes, he breathes on them. And again, this is a nod back to Genesis, and he says to them, receive the Holy Spirit. Receive the animation of life. Receive the presence of God. And so, I need y'all to hear, even when you don't know it intellectually, and even when you don't feel it emotionally, entrust yourself to the work of Christ and believe that Christ is with you by his Spirit. Because he says so. I know that's easy to say. It's hard to actually live into. But resurrection really means that we have peace, that we have been reconciled, and so God really is here with us. And nothing can separate us from that love. We don't have to wait for life after death, for some distant day when we get to be with God. God is here now with us. God's Spirit has been poured out so that we, in our daily routines, our daily failures, our daily successes, our daily misery, our daily celebrations, our daily boredom, all of it, we walk in communion with God. Lord, may we open our eyes to this reality. May it shine through all things and reach our so often hardened and beaten down hearts, that we might open ourselves to the reality that God is really actually with us here. The final way we walk in God's future now in the present is that we live as people of forgiveness. This is the fun one. God's justice will always lead to communion. That is, God's justice will always lead to reconciliation. And this means that we are people poised and ready to both receive and to offer forgiveness. And this will, if we will walk into it, if we will step into the very difficult thing that this is, it means that we are free from shame, we are free from judgment, and we are free from all the coercive ways that we feel like we need to dole out justice and vengeance on the world and our neighbors. We're free to embrace life as it comes, to join God in the dismantling of unjust systems, and to recklessly love even our enemies. To forgive and to forgive and to forgive and to forgive. As one of the Easter prayers from the Book of Common Prayer says, Easter has brought our future into our present so that we may show forth in our lives what we profess in our faith. That we might show forth in our lives what we profess in our faith. So last week, I described this world as this world of static. And ironically, this world has felt more static-y to me this week than it has felt music-y. That's a word, right? Music-y? And so I've had to live into so much of this sermon this week myself, of just clinging to these promises and this reality, even when they haven't felt true. But resurrection means that we've been given a promise and we've been given ears to hear the song. And that even when we don't think we can hear it, we trust that the song is still there and that we are free to actually really dance. I know we're not a dancing group, most of us. Some of y'all get down on Friday nights, but you don't get down on Sunday mornings. You know who you are. But what if we might give ourselves over to this song in such a way that we reveled in it, that we were caught up in it, that we enjoyed it, and all of a sudden life opens up in a wholly different way. And our annoying coworkers become something more than just annoying coworkers. Our busy to-do list becomes something other than our busy to-do list. Look at the way John ends this section, and it's towards the end of his book. He says this, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book." And us craving for knowledge are why not? We want all the signs. Give us all the signs. John has some things to say about that in other parts of his gospel. But here he says, "But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life." And so often what we want to do is we want to fill in that word life for heaven. That so believing you may have heaven. And yet what John is very clearly saying in the Greek, pinky up, is present, real, abundant life now. And so Easter means that you can wake up to God, to wake up to the music, to God's reality, God's song here and now. Easter means that God has opened up to you His world and not the old world of sin and death. You are awakened to God's presence with you here, even now, even in this. So now you can begin to live a life that's awake to God. You can begin to live a life of God's future, even right now in the present. Redemption Church, because Christ has risen, we can live. Peace be with you.
Thanks for listening. I hope you found this sermon meaningful. We want you to know that you are welcome here. To connect with someone from our team, reach out by visiting redemptionhou.com/connect. Now, go out today in the love of the Father, and by His Spirit, embody the hope of Jesus to the world around you.